The sound of shattering glass pierced the air, followed by a string of expletives that would make a sailor blush. I rushed into the kitchen, my heart pounding, to find Mark standing over a mess of broken dishes and spilled pasta sauce. "Damn it, Julia! Can't you put things away properly?" he snapped, his face flushed with anger. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to point out that he was the one who had insisted on reorganizing the cabinets last week. Instead, I grabbed a broom and dustpan. "It's okay, honey. Accidents happen. Let me clean this up." As I swept up the shards, Mark stomped out of the kitchen, muttering under his breath. I sighed, feeling the weight of tension settle over our once peaceful home. "Everything all right down there?" Dennis's voice called from upstairs. "Fine, Dad," I shouted back, wincing at the strain in my voice. "Just a little accident, nothing to worry about." I finished cleaning and started on a new batch of pasta sauce, my mind wandering to happier times. It hadn't always been like this. When Mark and I first got married, we were blissfully happy, but then his father's accident changed everything. The timer on the stove buzzed, snapping me back to reality. I stirred the sauce and called out, "Dinner's ready!" Mark trudged back into the kitchen, his mood seemingly improved. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, nuzzling my neck. "Smells good, babe. Sorry about earlier." I leaned into his embrace, savoring the moment of peace. "It's okay. Let's just enjoy dinner, all right?" We set the table as Dennis made his way downstairs, each step slow and deliberate. I rushed to help him into his chair, ignoring Mark's impatient sigh. "How are you feeling today, Dennis?" I asked, spooning pasta onto his plate. He smiled weakly. "Better, thanks to you, Julia. Don't know what I'd do without you." Mark rolled his eyes. "Dad, you've got to start doing more for yourself. Julia's not your nurse." I shot Mark a warning glance. "It's fine. I'm happy to help." We ate in uncomfortable silence, the only sounds the scraping of forks against plates. I was about to attempt some small talk when the doorbell rang. Mark jumped up. "I'll get it!" I frowned, surprised by his eagerness. A moment later, I heard a familiar voice that made my stomach churn. "Hello, darlings." Patricia's shrill tone carried through the house. "I hope I'm not interrupting dinner." Mark's mother swept into the dining room, all designer clothes and overpowering perfume. She air-kissed Mark's cheeks before turning to me with a tight smile. "Julia, dear, you look tired. Are you getting enough rest?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Patricia. Would you like to join us for dinner?" "Oh no, I've already eaten. I just stopped by to discuss something with Mark." She turned to her son. "Do you have a moment, sweetheart?" Mark nodded eagerly. "Of course, Mom. Let's talk in the study." As they left, I caught a glimpse of Patricia slipping an envelope into Mark's hand. My curiosity piqued. I strained to hear their hushed conversation, but could only make out fragments. Perfect opportunity. She doesn't need to know. Take care of everything. A chill ran down my spine. What were they planning? Dennis cleared his throat, drawing my attention back to the table. His eyes, usually clouded with confusion, were surprisingly sharp. "Julia," he said softly, "I think we need to talk." Before I could respond, Mark and Patricia returned, both wearing suspiciously cheerful expressions. "Great news," Mark announced. "Mom's invited us on a trip to Europe, 2 weeks in Paris and Rome. Isn't that exciting?" I blinked, stunned. "But what about your father? We can't just leave him alone." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, we'll hire a nurse. It'll be fine." As Mark launched into enthusiastic travel plans, I caught Dennis's eye. He gave me a subtle nod, confirming my growing suspicion that something wasn't right. In that moment, I realized our seemingly perfect family was about to be turned upside down. And I had a sinking feeling that I was the only one not in on the secret. The moving truck rumbled away, leaving us standing in Patricia's driveway, surrounded by boxes and uncertainty. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the anxiety bubbling in my chest. This was supposed to be temporary, just until we could find a place better suited for Dennis's recovery. But as I caught Patricia's critical gaze sweeping over our belongings, I had a sinking feeling that temporary might stretch longer than I'd hoped. "Well, don't just stand there gawking," Patricia chirped, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Let's get you settled in." Mark grabbed a box and followed his mother inside, leaving me to help Dennis navigate the front steps. As we made our way into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were crossing a threshold into something far more complicated than a simple living arrangement. The first few days were a whirlwind of unpacking and adjusting. Patricia flitted about, offering unsolicited advice on everything from how to arrange our clothes to the proper way to make coffee. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that she was doing us a favor by taking us in. One morning, I was helping Dennis with his physical therapy exercises when Patricia burst into the room, her face pinched with displeasure. "Julia, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I couldn't help but notice you've rearranged the guest room. I thought we agreed you'd keep things as they were." I blinked, caught off guard. "I'm sorry, Patricia. I just moved a few things to make it easier for Dennis to get around." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Well, I'd appreciate it if you'd consult me before making any changes. This is still my house, after all." As she turned to leave, I saw Dennis roll his eyes behind her back. I stifled a laugh, grateful for the moment of shared frustration. The weeks wore on, and Patricia's helpful suggestions became more frequent and less subtle. She critiqued my cooking, my cleaning, even the way I helped Dennis. Mark, ever the dutiful son, seemed oblivious to the growing tension. One evening, I was folding laundry when I overheard Patricia and Mark talking in hushed tones in the study. "I'm just saying, Mark, she's not exactly wife material," Patricia hissed. "The way she coddles your father, it's like she's forgotten her place in this family." My hands froze mid-fold, my heart pounding in my ears. Mark's response was muffled, but I caught enough to make my blood run cold. "I know, Mom, but we need her right now, just until Dad's better, and we can—" The rest of his sentence was lost as they moved further into the room. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind reeling. What were they planning? And how could Mark talk about me like that? Later that night, as Mark snored softly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts a tangled mess. I thought about the life we'd left behind, the dreams we'd had. When had everything gone so wrong? A soft knock at the door jolted me from my reverie. I padded across the room, opening it to find Dennis standing there, looking more alert than I'd seen him in weeks. "Julia," he whispered, his eyes darting nervously down the hall, "we need to talk. There's something you should know about Patricia and Mark." My heart raced as I ushered him into the room. As Dennis began to speak, his words confirming my worst fears and revealing even darker truths, I felt the last vestiges of my old life crumbling away. In that moment, standing in the dim light of Patricia's guest room, I realized that the family I thought I'd married into was nothing but a carefully constructed facade. And as Dennis laid bare the web of lies and manipulation that surrounded us, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone. It was time to make some calls and start planning my next move. Because one thing was crystal clear. I couldn't stay in this house of secrets and lies for much longer. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I made a silent vow. I would protect Dennis, uncover the truth, and find a way out of this mess, no matter the cost. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, mocking my exhaustion. I'd been up since dawn, preparing breakfast, tidying the house, and helping Dennis with his morning routine. As I scrubbed dishes, my mind wandered to the life I'd imagined for myself. This certainly wasn't it. "Julia!" Patricia's shrill voice cut through my reverie. "Where's my morning tea?" I bit back a sigh. "Coming, Patricia." As I set the steaming cup before her, Patricia wrinkled her nose. "Is this Earl Grey? You know I prefer English breakfast in the morning." "I'm sorry," I said, forcing a smile. "We're out of English breakfast. I'll pick some up today." Patricia huffed. "See that you do. And while you're at it, the living room could use a good dusting. Really, Julia, I expected better from you." I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to snap back. Instead, I nodded and retreated to the kitchen, where I found Mark lounging with his coffee. "Honey," I started, "I could really use your help today. Dennis has a doctor's appointment, and I need to run errands." Mark cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Sorry, babe. I've got a big meeting at work. You can handle it, right?" Before I could respond, he was out the door, leaving me alone with my frustration and a mountain of tasks. The day dragged on, each hour bringing a new challenge. Dennis struggled with his physical therapy, his progress seeming to plateau. Patricia's complaints echoed through the house, a constant reminder of my perceived shortcomings. By evening, I was at my breaking point. As I helped Dennis into bed, he squeezed my hand, his eyes full of concern. "Julia," he said softly, "you can't keep going like this. It's too much for one person." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "What choice do I have, Dennis? Mark's always working, and Patricia—" I trailed off, not wanting to speak ill of his wife. Dennis shook his head. "Patricia has always been difficult, but this is beyond the pale. And Mark?" He sighed heavily. "My son should be ashamed of himself." Just then, Patricia's voice rang out from downstairs. "Julia, where are you? These floors won't mop themselves." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "I should go," I murmured to Dennis. As I descended the stairs, I found Patricia standing in the foyer, arms crossed. "Really, Julia," she began, her tone dripping with disdain, "I don't know why you insist on spending so much time with Dennis. He's perfectly capable of putting himself to bed." Something inside me snapped. "He's your husband, Patricia, and he needs our help. Why can't you see that?" Patricia's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home? I've been nothing but generous, taking you in, and this is how you repay me?" "Generous?" I laughed bitterly. "You've done nothing but criticize and complain since we got here. I'm doing my best to take care of everyone, and it's never enough for you." Our voices had risen, echoing through the house. I heard the front door open, and Mark stepped in, looking bewildered. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Patricia turned to her son, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Mark, your wife is being absolutely dreadful to me. I don't know how much more of this I can take." Mark's face hardened as he looked at me. "Julia, what's wrong with you? How could you treat my mother this way?" I stared at him, incredulous. "Are you serious? After everything I've done, you're taking her side?" The tension in the room was palpable. I looked from Mark to Patricia, suddenly seeing them clearly for the first time. They were two sides of the same coin, manipulative and self-serving. In that moment, I made a decision. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." Mark's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze. "I'm saying that something has to change. Either we leave this house or I'm leaving alone." The silence that followed was deafening. As I turned and walked away, leaving Mark and Patricia stunned in the foyer, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain: things would never be the same again. The days following my outburst were tense, to say the least. Mark barely spoke to me, spending most of his time at work or locked away in Patricia's study. Patricia, for her part, had taken to ignoring me entirely, communicating only through icy glares and pointed sighs. But amid the frosty silence, I found an unexpected source of warmth: Dennis. One morning, as I helped him with his exercises, he grasped my hand firmly. "Julia," he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard in weeks, "I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you're doing." Tears pricked at my eyes. "Thank you, Dennis. That means more than you know." He nodded, a determined look crossing his face. "I've been thinking. It's time I started pushing myself harder." "Will you help me?" "Of course," I replied, feeling a spark of hope ignite in my chest. Over the next few weeks, Dennis and I fell into a new routine. We'd start each day with more challenging exercises, pushing the boundaries of what he could do. Some days were frustrating, filled with setbacks and pain. But there were also moments of triumph. The first time he stood unassisted, the day he managed to walk the length of the hallway with just a cane. Each small victory felt like a personal win, a reminder that my efforts weren't in vain. As Dennis grew stronger, so did my resolve. One afternoon, as we rested after a particularly grueling session, Dennis turned to me with a serious expression. "Julia, there's something you need to know about Patricia and Mark." My heart raced. "What is it?" Before he could answer, the door burst open. Patricia stood there, her face a mask of fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "You're pushing him too hard. He's not ready for this." I stood my ground. "Dennis is making great progress. The doctor agrees that—" "The doctor?" Patricia interrupted. "What doctor? I haven't authorized any appointments." "I did," Dennis said firmly. "I'm perfectly capable of making my own medical decisions, Patricia." Patricia's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Mark!" she shrieked. "Mark, come here at once." Moments later, Mark appeared, looking flustered. "What's going on?" Patricia pointed an accusing finger at me. Your wife has been making decisions behind our backs. She's endangering your father's health." Mark's expression hardened. "Is this true, Julia?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I've been helping Dennis with his recovery. Yes, and he's improving. If you'd been around more, you'd see that." Mark's eyes flashed with anger. "How dare you? We took you in, gave you a place to stay, and this is how you repay us?" "Repay you," I laughed bitterly. "I've been working myself to the bone taking care of this family while you two plot and scheme behind my back." The room fell silent. Dennis cleared his throat. "Son, your wife is right. She's been doing all the work while you and your mother—" He trailed off, shaking his head. Mark's face paled. "Dad, you don't understand. We're just trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Dennis demanded. "From getting better? From regaining my independence?" Patricia stepped forward, her voice sickly sweet. "Darling, you know your condition is delicate. We just want what's best for you." I watched the exchange, pieces falling into place. The hushed conversations, the mysterious meetings, the resistance to Dennis's recovery, it all pointed to something sinister. "What are you two hiding?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark and Patricia exchanged a panicked look. In that moment I knew. Whatever secret they were keeping, it was big, and it had everything to do with Dennis's accident and recovery. Dennis struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. "I think it's time we had a family meeting," he said, his voice filled with a quiet authority I'd never heard before. No more secrets, no more lies. As I helped Dennis to the living room, my mind raced. Whatever was about to be revealed, I had a feeling it would change everything. And I knew with absolute certainty that I was ready to face it head on. The time for playing happy families was over. Now it was time for the truth. The tension in the living room was palpable as we gathered for the long-overdue family meeting. Dennis sat in his armchair, his posture more upright than I'd seen in months. Mark and Patricia perched on the edge of the sofa, exchanging nervous glances. I stood by the fireplace, my heart pounding. Before anyone could speak, Patricia cleared her throat. "Before we get into whatever this is, I have an announcement to make." She plastered on a bright smile. "Mark and I are going on a vacation to Europe, 2 weeks in Paris and Rome. Isn't that wonderful?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "What, now? But what about Dennis's care?" Mark avoided my gaze. "We thought you could handle it, Julia. You've been doing such a great job." Dennis's eyes narrowed. "And when were you planning to inform me of this little getaway?" Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, darling, we didn't want to burden you with the details. You know how travel talk exhausts you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you're just going to leave? After everything that's happened?" "Now, Julia," Patricia said, her voice sickly sweet. "Don't be dramatic. It's just a little vacation. We all need a break sometimes, don't we?" Something inside me snapped. "A break? A break from what exactly? From watching me run myself ragged, taking care of your family while you two scheme and plot?" Mark stood up, his face flushed. "That's enough, Julia. You're out of line." "No, she's not," Dennis said quietly. "Julia's right. It's time we address the elephant in the room." He turned to Mark and Patricia. "What really happened the night of my accident?" The color drained from Patricia's face. "I don't know what you mean, darling. You fell down the stairs, remember?" Dennis shook his head. "No, I don't remember. But I've been having flashes, arguments, raised voices, something about the company." Mark's hands were shaking. "Dad, you're confused. The doctors said your memory might be affected." "Stop lying," I shouted, surprising even myself with the force of my words. "Whatever you're hiding, it ends now. Dennis deserves the truth." Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Mark, we're leaving. Now." As they moved towards the door, I blocked their path. "Not until you explain yourselves." Mark's eyes flashed with anger. "Move, Julia. You have no idea what you're getting into." "Then enlighten me," I challenged. For a moment, I thought Mark might push past me, but then his shoulders sagged. "Fine. You want the truth? Dad was going to sell the company. He said he was tired, wanted to retire. But Mom and we couldn't let that happen. We tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen." Dennis's voice was barely a whisper. "So you what? Pushed me down the stairs?" Patricia let out a strangled sob. "It was an accident. We were arguing and you just fell. We never meant for any of this to happen." The room spun around me as the implications of their confession sank in. They had been willing to let Dennis languish, to keep him dependent, all to maintain control of the company. "You monsters," I breathed. Mark reached for me. "Julia, please. You have to understand." I recoiled from his touch. "Understand what? That you've been lying to me our entire marriage? That you were willing to sacrifice your own father's health for money?" Oh, Patricia's eyes hardened. "You ungrateful little—" "Enough!" Dennis's voice boomed through the room. With effort, he pushed himself to his feet. "Mark, Patricia, I want you out of this house. Now." "But Dad—" Mark started. Dennis held up a hand. "No, I've heard enough. Go on your vacation. When you return, my lawyers will be in touch." As Mark and Patricia hurried out, casting panicked glances over their shoulders, I felt a strange mix of relief and terror. The truth was out, but the battle was far from over. Dennis turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "Julia, I'm going to need your help. Are you with me?" I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. "Every step of the way, Dennis. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As the door slammed behind Mark and Patricia, I knew we were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The life I had known was over. But perhaps, just perhaps, something better was about to begin. The house felt eerily quiet in the days following Mark and Patricia's hasty departure. Dennis and I moved through the rooms like ghosts, each lost in our own thoughts. The weight of recent revelations hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the betrayal we'd both endured. On the third morning, I was preparing breakfast when Dennis wheeled himself into the kitchen, a determined look on his face. "Julia," he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard in months, "we need to talk." I set down the spatula, my heart racing. "What is it, Dennis?" He took a deep breath. "I haven't been entirely honest with you. My recovery, it's been progressing faster than I've let on." To my astonishment, Dennis pushed himself up from the wheelchair, standing on shaky but steady legs. He took a few tentative steps towards me, no cane in sight. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Dennis, this is amazing, but why didn't you tell me?" His eyes clouded with shame. "I was afraid of what Patricia and Mark might do if they knew I was getting better. But after what happened, I can't hide anymore." As the implications of his words sank in, a mix of emotions washed over me. Joy at his progress, anger at the deception, and a growing sense of determination. "We need to act fast," I said, my mind racing. "Mark and Patricia could be back any day. We need a plan." Dennis nodded grimly. "I've been thinking about that. I know where Patricia keeps all the important documents, financial records, company papers, everything. If we can get our hands on those—" "We could expose them," I finished, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. For the next few hours, Dennis and I pored over the house, searching for any evidence of Mark and Patricia's misdeeds. We found hidden bank statements showing suspicious transfers, emails discussing the accident, in coded language, and even a draft of a revised will that would have left Dennis with nothing. As we sat surrounded by damning evidence, Dennis's phone buzzed. His face paled as he read the message. "It's Mark," he said, his voice tight. "They're coming back early. They'll be here tomorrow morning." Panic clawed at my throat. What do we do? Dennis's eyes hardened with resolve. "We finish this tonight." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. We scanned documents, made copies, and prepared a detailed timeline of events. Dennis called his lawyer, arranging an emergency meeting for first thing in the morning. As night fell, we sat in the living room, the fruits of our labor spread out before us. The magnitude of what we were about to do hit me like a tidal wave. "Dennis," I whispered, "are you sure about this? Once we do this, there's no going back." He reached out, grasping my hand tightly. "Julia, you've been more family to me in these past months than my own flesh and blood. Whatever happens, we face it together." Tears pricked at my eyes as I nodded, squeezing his hand in return. Suddenly, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway shattered the moment. My blood ran cold as I heard familiar voices approaching the front door. "They're back," I hissed, panic rising in my chest. "What do we do?" Dennis's face set in grim determination. "We stand our ground. No more hiding. No more lies." As the key turned in the lock, I felt a strange calm settle over me. We'd prepared for this, planned for every contingency. Whatever Mark and Patricia threw at us, we were ready. The door swung open, revealing Mark and Patricia, their faces a mix of surprise and suspicion as they took in the scene before them. "What's going on here?" Mark demanded, his eyes darting between Dennis and me. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Welcome home," I said, my tone laced with steel. "We need to talk." As Mark and Patricia stepped into the room, the air crackled with tension. This was it, the moment of truth. Everything we'd been through, everything we'd discovered had led to this confrontation, and I was ready to fight with everything I had. The tension in the room was suffocating as Mark and Patricia stood frozen in the doorway, their eyes darting between Dennis and me, and the incriminating documents spread across the coffee table. "What is all this?" Patricia demanded, her voice shrill. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "This is the truth, Patricia. All of it." Mark stepped forward, his face a mask of fury. "What have you done, Julia, going through our private papers? This is a violation." "No," Dennis interrupted, slowly rising to his feet. "The only violation here is what you two have done to this family." Patricia's face drained of color as she watched her husband stand. "Dennis, how... You're walking." "No thanks to you," I spat, my anger finally boiling over. "We know everything. The accident, the company, the will, all of it." Mark lunged forward, reaching for the papers, but I was quicker. I snatched them up, backing away. "Don't even think about it, Mark. It's over." "You don't understand," Mark pleaded, his composure cracking. "We were trying to protect the family legacy. Dad was going to throw it all away." Dennis's voice was cold as steel. "It wasn't yours to protect, son. The company, the money, none of it matters more than trust and family, something you seem to have forgotten." Patricia's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You ungrateful little witch," she hissed at me. "We took you in, gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? By turning my husband against us?" I stood my ground, meeting her gaze. "You did this to yourselves, Patricia. Your greed, your manipulation. It ends now." The room erupted into chaos. Mark lunged for the documents again, this time managing to grab a handful. Patricia screamed accusations, her carefully manicured facade crumbling. Dennis tried to intervene, but in the scuffle, he lost his balance. Time seemed to slow as I watched Dennis fall. In that moment, all I could think about was that night, the night of his accident. Had it looked like this? Had he reached out, desperate for help, only to be betrayed by those he trusted most? I dove forward, managing to catch Dennis before he hit the ground. As we stumbled, my elbow caught the edge of the coffee table. Pain exploded through my arm, but I held on, easing Dennis onto the sofa. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice raw with emotion. "Look at what you're doing. Your own father. You'd risk hurting him again just to cover your tracks?" Mark froze, the papers clutched in his trembling hands. For the first time I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. Patricia, however, was beyond reason. "You have no right," she seethed. "This is our home, our family. You're nothing but an interloper, a gold digger who—" "That's enough, Patricia," Dennis cut in, his voice quiet but firm. "Julia is more family to me now than either of you, and as of this moment you are both no longer welcome in this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face crumpled, the reality of what he'd done finally sinking in. Patricia stood rigid, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You can't be serious," she finally managed. "You can't just throw us out. Where will we go?" I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "That's not our problem anymore. You have until morning to pack your things and leave. If you're not gone by then, we'll have no choice but to involve the authorities." As the weight of our words sank in, I saw the fight drain out of Mark and Patricia. They looked suddenly small, defeated, no longer the towering figures of authority and control they'd once been. Dennis reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "It's over," he whispered. But as I looked at the broken family before me, at the husband I'd once loved and the life I'd thought I wanted, I realized that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. "No," I said softly, straightening my shoulders. "It's just beginning." The morning sun streamed through the windows as Dennis and I sat in his study, surrounded by stacks of documents and a sense of grim determination. It had been a week since we'd confronted Mark and Patricia, a week of sleepless nights and endless preparation. Today was the day we'd take everything public. "Are you ready for this?" Dennis asked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a mix of sadness and resolve. I took a deep breath, nodding. "As ready as I'll ever be." What about you? This is your family we're about to expose. Dennis reached across the desk, grasping my hand. You're my family now, Julia. What Mark and Patricia did, they stopped being family the moment they chose greed over love. With trembling fingers, I pressed send on the email that would change everything. In an instant, our carefully compiled evidence was on its way to the board of directors, the company's legal team, and select members of the press. The response was almost immediate. My phone began buzzing incessantly with calls and messages. Dennis's lawyer arrived, looking grim but determined. As the morning wore on, the story broke across local news channels. Breaking news: scandal rocks prominent family business. CEO Dennis Hawthorne alleges attempted murder and fraud by son and wife. I watched the headline scroll across the screen, feeling a surreal mix of vindication and sorrow. This was it, the moment of truth we'd been working towards. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Mark stormed in, his face contorted with rage. "How could you do this?" he shouted. "You've ruined everything." I stood my ground, facing the man I once thought I loved. "No, Mark. You ruined everything the moment you chose money over your father's life." Patricia appeared behind him, her usual poise shattered. "We can fix this," she pleaded, her eyes wild. "Dennis, darling, surely we can come to some arrangement. Think of the scandal, the family name." "Enough!" Dennis's voice boomed through the room. He stood, walking towards them without assistance. "The family name? The only thing tarnishing our name is your actions. It's over." As if on cue, the sound of police sirens filled the air. Mark's face drained of color. "You called the police? Your own son?" Dennis's expression was a mixture of pain and resolve. "You stopped being my son the moment you conspired against me." "Julia," he turned to me, "would you show the officers in?" I nodded, moving towards the door. As I passed Mark, he grabbed my arm. "Julia, please," he begged. "We can start over. I love you." For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the stranger he'd become. "No, Mark," I said softly. "You love what I represented, a way to keep your lifestyle, your inheritance, but you never truly loved me." As the police entered, reading Mark and Patricia their rights, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The nightmare was finally ending. Hours later, after the dust had settled and the house was quiet once more, Dennis and I sat on the porch, watching the sun set. "What now?" I asked, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. Dennis smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. "Now, we live. I'm thinking of selling the company, maybe starting a foundation. And you, Julia, you have your whole life ahead of you." I felt tears prick my eyes. I don't even know who I am anymore, outside of all this. Dennis squeezed my hand. "You're the woman who saved my life, who stood up for what's right no matter the cost. That's who you are, Julia, and I couldn't be prouder to call you family." As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years I felt truly free to discover who I was, what I wanted, and where I belonged. "You're right," I said, smiling through my tears. "This isn't an ending, it's a new beginning." Dennis raised his glass of iced tea. "To new beginnings and to family, the kind we choose." I clinked my glass against his, feeling a surge of hope for the future. "To family," I echoed. As night fell, I realized that sometimes the greatest acts of love involve letting go. I had let go of a toxic marriage, of false dreams, and of the person I thought I needed to be. In return, I had gained something far more precious: self-respect, true family, and the courage to face whatever came next. The journey had been painful, but as I sat there with Dennis, I knew that every step had been worth it. We had faced our demons, exposed the truth, and come out stronger on the other side. And now, finally, we were free to write our own stories. "Evelyn, where are you? Why is our house just gone?" Ethan's voice, laced with panic, was music to my ears. I savored the moment, the sweet retribution for his betrayal. "Yes, Ethan, I had it demolished. Everything you left behind is gone." "But why?" His disbelief was palpable. "Because, Ethan, some things are too broken to be fixed," I replied, a cold calmness in my voice. "I am Evelyn, a 45-year-old caregiver, married to Ethan, a 46-year-old marketing executive. Our son, Lucas, had just moved out after college, leaving an echo in our home and apparently in Ethan's sense of responsibility. The day Lucas left, Ethan chuckled. Evelyn, he's not a kid anymore. Let him make his own mistakes. I remember feeling a twinge of annoyance, masked by the relief of seeing them both smile. But that annoyance, that small crack, was about to widen into a chasm. Just as I thought we'd rediscover each other, life took a sharp turn. Dad fell in the yard. Broken bone, maybe. I'm heading to the hospital, Ethan informed me one evening, his voice oddly detached. Should I come with you? No, I got this. Don't worry. But worry I did. At work, I was distracted, feeling an impending sense of doom. Returning home, I found Ethan lounging on the couch, as if his father's fracture was just another minor inconvenience. He'll need a cane, Ethan said casually, as if discussing the weather. This wasn't just about a cane. This was about Henry, Ethan's father, who had been living alone since his wife passed away 3 years ago. Despite our offers, he had refused to move in with us, valuing his independence. Now the decision was made for him. We should live with your dad, right? I asked Ethan, already knowing his answer. Sure, why not? He's family. The family home, where Ethan grew up, was more suitable for Henry in his condition. It was settled. We would move in with Henry. Little did I know, this decision was the first step towards an irreversible change, a change that would shatter the very foundations of our life together. That evening, as I looked around our soon-to-be-left condo, memories of Lucas's childhood flooded my mind. There was a bittersweet tang in the air, a mix of nostalgia and foreboding. Ethan's indifference was like a growing shadow in our home, but I was too preoccupied with the logistics of the move to confront it. In my heart, I hoped this move would bring us closer, not just to Henry, but to each other. How wrong I was. The move happened faster than expected. Henry, frail but smiling, welcomed us. Sorry to be a burden, he said, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of memories held within the walls of his home. You're not a burden, Dad. You're family. I assured him, while Ethan just nodded, his mind seemingly elsewhere. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the old house, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed more distant than ever, lost in thoughts I could not reach. It was the beginning of the end, the start of a journey that would lead me to the ultimate act of defiance. Little did Ethan know, his world, our world, was about to come crashing down. The walls of Henry's house, steeped in history, were now silent witnesses to a growing rift. As days turned to weeks, Ethan's late returns from work became the norm. His once warm smiles were replaced by a cold, distant demeanor. Evelyn, he's my father. I know how to handle him, Ethan snapped one evening when I expressed my concern about his lack of involvement with Henry. I bit my tongue, the bitterness of his words stinging me. It wasn't just about Henry, it was about us, about what we were becoming, or rather what we were losing. Julia, Ethan's sister, visited one weekend. Her concern was palpable as she watched us moving around each other like distant planets in a decaying orbit. Are you sure about this, Evelyn? Living with Dad, I mean. I can take him if it's too much, Julia offered, her eyes searching mine for a hint of reluctance. I forced a smile. No, Julia, it's fine. We're fine. But we weren't. Ethan's aloofness was growing into a chasm that I could no longer bridge. His excuses for staying out late became more frequent, his explanations more flimsy. Evelyn, I'm just grabbing a drink with colleagues. Networking, you know, he would say, his words lacking the conviction they once held. Networking or escaping? I found solace in Henry's company. Our conversations, filled with stories of the past, were a balm to my growing loneliness. In those moments I felt a connection, a belonging that had started to fade with Ethan. One evening, as I helped Henry with his exercises, his voice trembled. Evelyn, you've been like a daughter to me. I hate to be the cause of any trouble between you and Ethan. I held his hand, assuring him, Henry, you are not the problem. Please don't think that. But deep down, I knew the problem wasn't Henry. It wasn't even Ethan's late nights. The problem was something far more sinister, a rot that had set in the core of our marriage. Ethan's indifference was now a gaping hole, swallowing any remnants of the love we once shared. His absence, both physical and emotional, left me grappling with a myriad of unanswered questions. Was this our new normal? A life of silent meals, unshared beds, and unspoken words? I lay awake that night, listening to the creaks of the old house, each groan echoing the turmoil in my heart. I missed Ethan, or rather, the Ethan I thought I knew. The man who now lay beside me, lost in his own world, was a stranger. As the days blurred into each other, Ethan's neglect of both Henry and me became more pronounced. His once excited talks about his day at work dwindled to monosyllables. His late-night returns were now expected, and his excuses a mere formality. The gap between us widened, filled with unspoken accusations and stifled emotions. I was living with a ghost, a shadow of the man I married. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I stumbled upon the first thread of the web of deceit Ethan had been weaving. A thread that would unravel everything we had built together. As I lay there, staring into the darkness, I made a decision. I would no longer be a spectator in this crumbling facade of a marriage. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And if my suspicions were correct, Ethan would soon learn that some actions have irreversible consequences. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The drama of our lives was about to reach its crescendo. The days turned into a monotonous cycle, with Ethan's apathy casting a shadow over the household. His late returns became so routine that I stopped asking where he had been. The silence between us grew louder, filled with unasked questions and unvoiced suspicions. One Saturday, I decided to confront him. "Ethan, your father feels neglected." "You're hardly here," I said, my voice a mix of frustration and desperation. Ethan scoffed. "He's fine, Evelyn. Stop being so dramatic. I have my life too, you know." His words stung, and I recoiled at his dismissiveness. Was this really the man I had loved for all these years? As I tended to Henry, his gratitude only deepened my resentment towards Ethan. "You're too good to us, Evelyn. I'm sorry for my son's behavior," Henry whispered during one of our walks. "It's not your fault, Henry. I just wish Ethan could see what he's missing," I replied, my heart heavy with unshed tears. Julia's visits became my solace, her presence a stark contrast to Ethan's indifference. "Evelyn, if you ever need to talk, I'm here," she offered one afternoon as we sipped tea in the garden. I nodded, grateful for her support, but too proud to admit how much Ethan's neglect was affecting me. The final straw came on a rainy Thursday evening. Ethan had not returned home, and his phone went straight to voicemail. Worried, I waited up, the clock ticking away my patience. He stumbled in past midnight, reeking of alcohol. "Where were you?" I demanded, my worry turning into anger. "Just out, Evelyn." "Stop being such a nag," he slurred, brushing past me. That word, nag, echoed in my mind, igniting a fire within me. I was not a nag. I was a wife concerned about her crumbling marriage. The following week, my suspicions turned into reality. While cleaning, I found a receipt in Ethan's jacket, a hotel receipt dated for a night he had claimed to be working late. My hands trembled as I read the details. Room service, a bottle of champagne, and a single room for two. The betrayal sliced through me, each word on the receipt a confirmation of Ethan's infidelity. My heart raced, a mixture of anger, pain, and disbelief coursing through me. I confronted him that evening, the receipt clenched in my fist. "What is this, Ethan? Explain this to me," I yelled, my composure shattered. Ethan's eyes widened, then narrowed. "It's not what you think, Evelyn. It was just a business meeting that went late." "A business meeting? With champagne in a hotel room?" I spat, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Ethan's silence was the only answer I needed. The truth hung in the air, a tangible presence that neither of us could deny. That night I lay awake, the weight of Ethan's betrayal crushing me. I had been a faithful wife, a caring stepdaughter, and yet this was the payment for my loyalty. As dawn broke, a cold resolve settled over me. Ethan had made his choice, and now I would make mine. It was time for Ethan to learn that every action has consequences. I would no longer be the silent victim of his deceit. The plan started to form in my mind, a plan that would shake the very foundation of Ethan's world. He had underestimated me for the last time. Evelyn, the doting wife and caregiver, was about to show Ethan a side of her he had never seen, a side that even I hadn't known existed. The stage was set for my revenge, and I was ready to play my part to perfection. Ethan's days of betrayal were numbered, and he wouldn't even see it coming. Armed with the bitter truth, I was a storm brewing on the horizon. Ethan's betrayal had lit a fire within me, and I was determined to make him pay. My plan for revenge began to take shape, fueled by each lie he had told, each night he had left me alone. Julia visited again, and this time I didn't hold back. "Ethan's having an affair," I confessed, the words tasting like poison on my lips. Julia's shock quickly turned to anger. That bastard! How could he do this to you, to Dad? We need to do something, Julia. I won't let him get away with this, I said, my voice steady with newfound resolve. We'll figure this out, Evelyn. I'm with you, Julia assured, her hand gripping mine. The opportunity presented itself when Ethan casually mentioned an upcoming business trip. A week in New York. Big project, he said, avoiding my gaze. A week, huh? I mused, a plan forming in my mind. Have a good trip. But it wouldn't be the business trip Ethan was expecting. No, this would be the week when his world would come crashing down. I started my preparations the moment he left. With Julia's help, I gathered evidence of his affair, hotel receipts, phone records, late-night messages. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Next, I contacted a lawyer to discuss divorce and property rights. I would not only leave Ethan, but I would also strip him of everything he held dear. His betrayal had cost him more than just our marriage. It would cost him his home, his comfort, his security. Evelyn, are you sure about this? Julia asked, concern etched on her face. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied, a cold determination in my voice. While Ethan was living it up in New York, oblivious to the storm brewing back home, I was executing my plan with precision. The house, Ethan's childhood home, was the first to go. I hired a demolition crew, explaining that the house was old and needed to be torn down for safety reasons. As the bulldozers tore through the walls, I watched with a sense of grim satisfaction. This was more than just a physical demolition. It was symbolic of the destruction of our marriage. Next, I arranged for the sale of the land. The property was in my name, thanks to Ethan's careless handling of the paperwork. The land would fetch a good price, and the money would be mine alone. As the days passed, my plan unfolded flawlessly. I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was the architect of Ethan's downfall. Finally, the day of Ethan's return arrived. I waited for his call, the anticipation a sweet torture. Evelyn, where are you? What happened to the house? Ethan's voice was laced with confusion and panic. I had it demolished, Ethan. And the land, it's been sold, I replied, each word a dagger to his heart. What? Why? Evelyn, that was our home, he stammered, his voice a mix of disbelief and despair. It was a house, Ethan, not a home. And now it's gone, just like our marriage, I said, my voice calm and steady. But why? How could you do this? Ethan's plea was pathetic, a far cry from the confident man he once was. You made your choice, Ethan. Now I've made mine. Goodbye. With that, I hung up, cutting off any further pleas or excuses. As I sat in the silent room, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had done it. I had taken back control of my life. Ethan's betrayal had shattered our marriage, but it had also awakened a strength in me that I never knew I had. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And as I looked ahead to my new life, free from lies and deceit, I knew one thing for sure. Ethan would never forget the name Evelyn. Ethan's world had crumbled, and I was the architect of its downfall. The day he returned, I waited, knowing he would confront me. As expected, his car screeched to a halt where our home once stood, now just an empty lot. What have you done, Evelyn? Ethan bellowed as he approached, his face a mask of shock and anger. I've freed myself from a life of lies and deceit, I replied calmly, my resolve unshaken. This was my childhood home. How could you? His voice cracked under the weight of his loss. Your childhood home? You mean the house where you neglected your father and betrayed your wife? My words were sharp, cutting through the air between us. Ethan staggered as if my words were physical blows. Evelyn, please, let's talk about this. Talk? Like you talked to your mistress? I countered, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. You don't understand. It was a mistake, Ethan pleaded, his eyes searching for any sign of the love that once bound us. A mistake repeated is a choice, Ethan, and you chose her over us, over everything we built together, I said, the finality in my voice echoing in the empty space. Ethan looked around, desperation taking hold. But where will I go? What about my things? Your things are in storage. As for where you'll go, that's no longer my concern, I stated, devoid of any sympathy. I never thought you could be this cruel. Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Cruel? No, Ethan, I'm not cruel. I'm just no longer your fool, I replied, turning away from the ruins of our past. Ethan's voice faded as I walked away, leaving him amidst the debris of his choices. I had exacted my revenge, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for myself. As I drove away, the weight of the past years seemed to lift off my shoulders. I was no longer bound by Ethan's betrayal or the confines of a loveless marriage. In destroying our physical home, I had built myself a new one, a sanctuary of self-respect and dignity. Ethan had taken so much from me, but he couldn't take away my strength or my ability to start anew. I had closed the chapter on Ethan and our life together. Now it was time to write a new story, one where I was the protagonist, not a victim of someone else's script. Ethan's downfall was the price he paid for his betrayal. As for me, I had gained something far more valuable, my freedom and a chance to rediscover who I was before I lost myself in our marriage. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was a road I looked forward to traveling. Ethan was a part of my past, a chapter closed and left behind. The future was mine to shape, and I embraced it with open arms and a heart free of the chains of betrayal. The aftermath of the house's demolition left Ethan in a state of shock and desperation. A few days later he called, his voice laced with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Evelyn, we need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on 5th, please." I agreed, curious to see how he would try to spin this tale. At the cafe, Ethan sat hunched over, a shadow of his former self. "Evelyn, why are you doing this? You've destroyed everything," he blurted out as I sat down. "Destroyed everything." "Ethan, you did that when you chose to have an affair," I replied, my tone even but firm. "That was a mistake. But this, what you're doing, it's unforgivable." His voice cracked, his facade of control crumbling. "A mistake? No, Ethan. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, not cheating on your wife." I countered sharply. "You can't just take everything from me. The house? The money? What about me?" Ethan's plea was pathetic, tinged with selfishness. "What about you? What about me, Ethan? Or did you forget that there were two people in this marriage?" I challenged. Ethan's face contorted with frustration. "You're being unreasonable. You're ruining my life over a fling." "A fling? Is that what you call breaking our vows, our trust?" My voice rose, attracting glances from nearby tables. "Evelyn, please, we can fix this. I'll end it with her. We can go to counseling," Ethan offered, desperation seeping into his voice. "Fix this? There's nothing left to fix, Ethan. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it," I said, my decision clear and unwavering. "I'll lose my job, my reputation." "You don't understand the consequences," he pleaded. "The consequences? You should have thought of that before." "Hanish, as for your job and reputation, those were never my concern," I replied, my tone icy. Ethan slumped, defeated. "So, what now? A divorce?" "Yes, a divorce. And since you're so concerned about consequences, I've recorded this conversation. Admitting to your affair will make the proceedings much smoother," I revealed, watching as the color drained from his face. "You recorded me?" Ethan gasped, his eyes wide with shock. "Yes. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions, Ethan. You've lost more than just a house. You've lost a wife who loved you, a family that respected you, and a life that you took for granted," I stated, standing up to leave. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Ethan's voice, calling out to me, was just a distant echo. I had closed that chapter of my life, and there was no turning back. The price of betrayal was high, and Ethan was paying it in full. I had not just sought revenge, I had sought justice for myself. The future was uncertain, but it was a future where I was no longer shackled by Ethan's deceit. I was free, and that freedom was the sweetest victory of all. The dust had settled, and Ethan's world was irrevocably altered. The divorce proceedings were swift, fueled by the incontrovertible evidence of his affair. He tried to argue, to fight, but the truth left him with no ground to stand on. As I sat across from him in the lawyer's office for the final signing, he was a mere shell of the man I once knew. "Evelyn, please, can't we rethink this?" Ethan's voice was a desperate whisper. "There's nothing left to rethink, Ethan. You made your choices, and now I've made mine," I replied, my voice steady and resolute. With each signature, I felt a chapter of my life closing, a chapter filled with pain, betrayal, and ultimately liberation. When it was over, Ethan tried to speak, but I cut him off. "There's nothing more to say, Ethan. Goodbye." Leaving the office, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer Ethan's wife. I was Evelyn, free and unbound. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's life continued to unravel. His job was lost, a casualty of the scandal. His reputation, once impeccable, was now tarnished by the truth of his indiscretions. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was living in a small apartment, a stark contrast to the life of comfort he once knew. His mistress had left him, unwilling to deal with the fallout of their affair. Ethan was alone, a consequence of his own making. As for me, I started anew. The money from the sale of the land allowed me financial freedom, and I found peace in my independence. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had long forgotten, and found joy in the small things. Julia and I remained close, our bond strengthened by the trials we faced together. "You're stronger than you ever realized, Evelyn," she said to me one evening over dinner. "I guess I am," I replied, a smile playing on my lips. My new life was simpler but richer in ways that money couldn't buy. I had respect, dignity, and a sense of self that no one could take from me. Ethan tried to reach out a few times, but I never responded. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no intention of revisiting it. I often thought about the house, the symbol of our broken marriage. In its destruction, I had found my strength. It was a drastic step, but it was necessary for me to break free. Now, looking ahead, I saw a path filled with possibilities. A path where I was the author of my own story, no longer a character in someone else's drama. The road to recovery was not easy, but it was mine to travel. I had survived the storm, and in its wake, I found a peace I never knew existed. Ethan's betrayal had shattered me, but in those broken pieces, I found myself, and that was the greatest victory of all.
The first thing I noticed when I opened my front door wasn't the overturned furniture or the scattered papers. It was the silence, that heavy, unnatural quiet that wraps around you like a burial shroud, whispering that something is terribly wrong. I'm Audrey, and I just spent 3 days at a corporate retreat learning how to trust my colleagues through ridiculous team-building exercises. Now I'm standing in my ransacked living room, realizing I should have been more concerned about trusting my own family. My fingers trembled as I dialed Ryan's number. 1 ring, 2 rings, the familiar click of voicemail. Of course, my dear husband was probably at his mother's house, pretending not to know why his wife was calling. "Ryan, someone broke into the house. The safe is open. Call me back immediately." I walked through the debris of my violated home, cataloging the damage. Photo frames face down, drawers pulled out and emptied, couch cushions slashed open. But they hadn't been looking for money or jewelry. No, this was personal. They went straight for what mattered most. My grandmother's letters, the only pieces I had left of her. My phone buzzed. Not Ryan. Evan from work. "How was the drive back?" he asked. "Someone broke into my house." My voice cracked. "The safe. They knew the combination, Evan." "Jesus, are you okay? Do you need me to come over?" "No, I know exactly who did this." I kicked aside a torn magazine. "Helen's fingerprints are all over this mess. She's been trying to get those letters for months." "Your mother-in-law, why would she?" "Because she can't stand that Ryan married someone who won't bow to her every whim." I reached the kitchen, where even the cabinets had been emptied. "She thinks those letters prove my grandmother's family wronged hers decades ago. Some ancient real estate dispute she won't let die." "Call the police," Evan said. "And tell them what?" "That my mother-in-law used a key my husband probably gave her to steal family documents. That my sister-in-law probably helped because she's bitter about her divorce and wants to hurt someone else's marriage." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "They're too smart for that. They'll say Ryan gave them permission. It'll be my word against the entire Miller family." The basement door stood open. I hadn't checked down there yet. "I have to go, Evan. I need to see what else they took." "Audrey, wait." I hung up and descended the stairs, each step creaking under my feet. The basement light flickered on, revealing more chaos, but something caught my eye. A small piece of paper trapped under a fallen box. I pulled it free. It was a receipt from the hardware store 3 days ago for a duplicate key. My phone buzzed again. "Ryan, where are you?" I asked before he could speak. "At Mom's." "Listen, Audrey, I can explain." "Did you give her a key?" Silence. Then, "She said she just wanted to look for some old family photos while you were away." I didn't think. You never do think when it comes to her, do you? I crushed the receipt in my fist. Those letters were all I had left of my grandmother, Ryan, the only things that were truly mine. We can talk about this when I get home. No. The word came out sharp enough to cut. We'll talk about this in front of everyone. I'm coming over there right now. And Ryan, tell your mother to prepare for war. I ended the call and stood in my destroyed basement, surrounded by the wreckage of trust. They thought they could break me, make me submit to their control, like everyone else in their lives. But they had no idea what they'd just started. Sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who strikes first. It's the one who knows how to strike back harder. Helen's pristine living room made my skin crawl. Everything perfectly arranged, not a cushion out of place, while my house lay in ruins across town. The family photos on her walls told their own story. Ryan and Chloe's childhood moments, carefully curated to show Helen's version of reality. Not a single picture of my wedding day among them. I have no idea what you're talking about. Helen's voice dripped honey-sweet poison as she poured tea into delicate cups. Ryan gave me permission to look for old family albums while you were away. Nothing more. Chloe sat beside her mother, arms crossed, wedding ring conspicuously absent. You're being hysterical, Audrey, as usual. I placed the hardware store receipt on the coffee table. Funny how you needed a new key made 3 days ago. Planning ahead? Ryan shifted in his seat, eyes darting between his mother and me. Maybe we should all calm down. Oh, we're very calm, I said, watching Helen's perfectly manicured fingers tighten around her teacup. Just like we were calm last Christmas when you went through my phone while I was sleeping. Or last month when you showed up unannounced at my office to check on me. I worry about my son, Helen said. Someone needs to look out for his interests. His interests. My laugh felt like broken glass in my throat. Or yours. Mother was right about you from the start. Chloe leaned forward, eyes gleaming. You never understood our family, always keeping secrets, hiding things in that safe of yours. Those letters belong to my grandmother. Letters that prove your family cheated ours 60 years ago. Helen's mask cracked. That property should have been ours. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing when she... Mother. Ryan's warning came too late. I stood slowly, pieces clicking into place. So you admit you took them. Helen's face smoothed over instantly. I admitted nothing. And you have no proof. You're right. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the record button. But I will. Ryan, are you coming home or staying here? He looked at his mother, then at me. Always torn, always choosing the path of least resistance. I think maybe we all need space to cool off. Wrong answer. I headed for the door, pausing to look back at Helen. You know what's funny? Those letters you stole? They're not even the originals. Just copies I kept as decoys. Grandmother taught me well. Always keep what matters most, where manipulative people can't reach it. Helen's teacup clattered against its saucer. You're lying. Am I? Guess you'll have to wonder about that, along with what else I might have hidden away. I met Ryan's eyes. Don't bother coming home tonight, or maybe ever. Audrey, wait. He started to rise, but Chloe grabbed his arm. Let her go, she said. She's just trying to manipulate you, like always. I closed the door on Helen's perfectly ordered world and walked to my car. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, but not from fear. The originals were safe, just as I'd said, locked away in a safety deposit box since the day I married Ryan, and saw the hunger in Helen's eyes when grandmother's letters were mentioned at the wedding. My phone buzzed. Evan again. How bad was it? He asked. They took the bait. Helen practically confessed. I started the engine. But I need your help with something else. Remember that security system you installed at your lake house? The one with the hidden cameras. Yeah, why? Because I'm done playing defense. They want to go through my things? Let's make sure we catch them in the act next time. I pulled away from Helen's house, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror. And Evan, thank you for being the one person in my life who actually listens. Always. But Audrey, just be careful. People like that, they're most dangerous when they're cornered. I ended the call, mind already racing with plans. Helen thought she knew everything about me, had me all figured out. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd spent 3 years watching her manipulate everyone around her. I'd learned from the best, and now it was time to put those lessons to use. The coffee shop across from Helen's favorite salon wasn't my usual spot, but it gave me a perfect view. I'd been watching for 2 hours when Evan slid into the seat across from me, pushing a fresh cup toward my hands. "The cameras are set up," he said. "Motion sensors, night vision, everything feeding directly to your phone. But are you sure about this?" I nodded toward the salon's window, where Helen and Chloe sat getting their weekly manicures. "Listen." I pressed play on my phone, their voices crystal clear through the bug I'd planted in Helen's purse during our confrontation. "We need those original letters," Helen was saying. "That safety deposit box has to be at her bank downtown." "Ryan says she's been going through their financial records," Chloe replied, "probably planning to divorce him and take everything." Over my dead body, I didn't spend 30 years building this family's reputation to have her destroy it. "We're going back to the house tomorrow while she's at work. There has to be something we can use against her." I stopped the recording. "Still think I'm paranoid?" Evan's face hardened. "We should take this to the police." "And tell them what?" "That my mother-in-law is planning to rob me. They'll say it's a family matter." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup. "Besides, I want more than just stopping them. I want them to face consequences for once in their privileged lives." My phone buzzed, Ryan calling again. "Third time today." I declined it. "He's been sleeping at their house," I said. "Probably plotting with them, trying to figure out where the originals are. Or maybe he's worried about you. Then he should have worried before giving them a key to our house." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth before choosing them over me again. A text from Ryan. "Please come home. We need to talk." "Home," I muttered. Like that means anything anymore. Evan leaned forward. "Audrey, I know you're hurt, but..." The salon door chimed. Helen and Chloe emerged, fresh manicures gleaming. They headed toward Helen's Mercedes, but Helen paused, looking directly at the coffee shop window. I didn't move, couldn't breathe. Her lips curved into that knowing smile I'd grown to hate. She knew I was watching. "Time to go," I said, standing abruptly. "They'll be at my house tomorrow at 10, according to their usual schedule. That's when we'll catch them." "We?" Evan raised an eyebrow. "I thought you wanted to handle this yourself." I do, but..." I gathered my things, hands shaking slightly. "I can't face them alone anymore. I need someone in my corner. Always." He touched my arm gently. "Just promise me something. Don't let revenge consume you. I've seen what it does to people." I watched Helen's car pull away, remembering the day she'd first shown her true colors. Our wedding reception, when she'd cornered me in the bathroom. "You'll never be good enough for this family," she'd said. "One day, Ryan will realize that." "This isn't about revenge," I told Evan. "It's about justice, and maybe saving Ryan from them, even if he doesn't want to be saved." My phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. I opened it and felt my blood freeze. "Found something interesting in your grandmother's old law firm records. Tomorrow noon, Riverside Park. Come alone, or Ryan learns everything about the Anderson case." Evan noticed my expression. "What's wrong?" I closed the message, mind racing. The Anderson case, my grandmother's biggest regret, the secret she'd taken to her grave. The real reason Helen hated our family. "Nothing," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just work stuff. I should go prepare for tomorrow." But as I walked to my car, Helen's words from 3 years ago echoed in my head. One day Ryan will realize that. Maybe she was right. Maybe tomorrow he would. And maybe it was time he did. Riverside Park looked different at noon. Colder somehow. I sat on a bench, clutching a manila envelope. Ammunition for whatever game Helen was playing. The Anderson case, files my grandmother had sealed away decades ago. Now a weapon in my hands. A shadow fell across my lap. Not Helen. "Ryan?" My voice cracked. "What are you..." "Mother told me everything." He sat beside me, leaving careful space between us. About the Anderson case, about what your grandmother did to our family. The envelope felt heavier. Did she tell you how your grandfather tried to blackmail mine? How he threatened to destroy their law firm unless they gave him that property? That's not. He stopped, rubbing his face. She said you'd try to twist things. Like she twisted you. I turned to face him. When did you give her the safe combination, Ryan? His silence was answer enough. The day after our wedding, I continued. When she convinced you I was hiding something. That's why you've been checking our bank statements, right? Looking for evidence I'm stealing from you? I was protecting our family. Our family. The laugh that escaped me didn't sound like my voice. There is no our family. There's only ever been yours. My phone buzzed. Evan texting about the cameras he'd installed. Everything was ready for tomorrow's trap. But suddenly, it all felt hollow. She's using you, I said softly. She always has. And you let her because it's easier than standing up to her. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I stood, dropping the envelope in his lap. Here, the precious Anderson case files. Proof that your grandfather was the one who committed fraud, not mine. Proof that your mother's been lying all these years. He stared at the envelope. How did you get them? From my grandmother's old partner. Turns out he's been waiting years for someone to finally expose the truth. I stepped back. But you know what? Keep them. Burn them. Give them to Helen. I don't care anymore. Audrey, wait. I filed for divorce yesterday. The words hung between us like shattered glass. Ryan's face went pale. You what? Check your email. The papers should arrive today. My hands were steady now. I'm done being the villain in Helen's story. Done watching you choose them over me. Done pretending we have a marriage worth saving. He stood, reaching for me. We can fix this. I'll talk to Mother. That's exactly the problem. I moved away from his touch. Your first instinct is still to run to her. It always will be. My phone buzzed again. Helen this time. Where are you? We had a deal. I typed back, deals changed. Ask Ryan about the files. You can't just throw away 3 years of marriage, Ryan said. You already did that when you gave them the key to our house. I started walking away, then paused. You know what the saddest part is? I actually thought I could save you from them, but you don't want to be saved. Audrey. Goodbye, Ryan. I walked through the park, past the spot where he proposed, past the bench where we used to have Sunday picnics. My phone kept buzzing. Helen, Ryan, even Chloe. I silenced them all. Only Evan's message got through. Cameras are live. You still want to go through with tomorrow's plan? I stopped at the park exit, looking back one last time. Ryan stood where I'd left him, envelope clutched in his hands, looking lost. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Then I remembered the ransacked house, the violated safe. 3 years of subtle manipulation and gaslighting. Yes, I texted back, but change of plans. I don't just want to catch them in the act anymore. What do you want? I watched Ryan pull out his phone, probably calling Helen, always running back to Mother. I want to destroy them, I typed, all of them. Because sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn everything to the ground and start over. The security camera feed flickered on my laptop screen as I sat in my car across the street. 10 minutes until Helen's usual Thursday morning intrusion. Evan's sophisticated setup captured every angle of my house. Front door, back door, even the garden path Helen loved to criticize. You don't have to watch this, Evan said from the passenger seat. We can just let the cameras record. I need to see it. My knuckles whitened around my coffee cup. Need to know exactly how they do it. Right on schedule, Helen's Mercedes glided to a stop in front of my house. She stepped out, perfectly coiffed as always, followed by Chloe. But then a third door opened. Ryan. The coffee cup crumpled in my grip. He's helping them. They approached the front door, Ryan glancing nervously over his shoulder. Helen said something, gesturing impatiently. He pulled out a key, not the copy, but his original. Jesus, Evan muttered. Audrey, maybe we should... Wait, I grabbed his arm as a fourth figure emerged from Helen's car. "Who is that?" The man in the expensive suit walked with authority, carrying a briefcase. He looked familiar somehow. "That's James Morton," Evan said. "Helen's lawyer. I've seen him at charity events." The group disappeared inside my house. I switched between camera views, watching them move through rooms with disturbing familiarity. Helen directed them like a general commanding troops. "The study," she was saying, voice clear through the hidden microphones. "Those Anderson files have to be here somewhere." "Mother, she said she gave them to me," Ryan protested weakly. "Copies, obviously. You think your wife would give up her only leverage? Search everything." I watched them tear through my home again, but this time was different. This time, I saw Ryan's hands shaking as he opened drawers, saw Chloe's satisfied smirk as she knocked books off shelves, saw Helen's mask slip when she thought no one was watching, revealing raw desperation beneath. "The safe," Morton said suddenly. "Did you check behind it?" My breath caught. The wall safe had been a decoy. Everyone knew about it. But behind it, "There's nothing back there," Ryan said quickly, too quickly. Helen's eyes narrowed. "Move it. Mother, move it." I grabbed my phone, fingers hovering over 911. Behind that safe was a hidden compartment, installed by the previous owner. Inside were documents far more damaging than the Anderson case. Evidence of Helen's own financial misconduct, carefully gathered over 3 years of watching and waiting. Ryan stepped forward, then stopped. "No." "What did you say?" Helen turned on him. I said no. His voice strengthened. "This ends now. We're leaving. After everything I've done for you." Helen's calm cracked. "That woman has poisoned you against your own family. That woman is my wife." "Not anymore," Morton interrupted smoothly. "The divorce papers were filed yesterday. You have no legal right to prevent us from..." "From what?" I stepped into the doorway, phone recording everything. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, conspiracy. They froze like guilty children, except Helen. She smiled that knowing smile. "Perfect timing, dear. We were just discussing the Anderson case and other family matters." "I can see that." I moved further into the room, Evan close behind. "But you made one mistake, Helen. You got sloppy. Desperate." "I don't know what you mean." "The Anderson case was never about property fraud, was it? It was about covering up what really happened. What you did." Her smile slipped. "You're confused. The real documents aren't behind that safe. They're already with the district attorney." I met Ryan's stunned gaze. "Along with proof that your mother embezzled millions from her own charity foundation. That's why she's so desperate to find evidence against my family. To protect herself." The room erupted in chaos. Helen lunged for her lawyer. Chloe started screaming. Ryan stood frozen between them all. But I kept my eyes on Helen, watching her perfect world crumble. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone. Sometimes it's about letting them destroy themselves. And sometimes justice comes from simply telling the truth. The police lights painted my living room in alternating red and blue. Helen sat primly on the couch, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face as she spoke to the officers. "I was just trying to protect my son," she sobbed. "From her." She pointed at me, and I watched 3 years of careful planning crumble. "Mrs. Miller was threatening our family," Morton added smoothly. "We have evidence of her harassment, her obsession with destroying her mother-in-law's reputation. The break-in was merely an attempt to recover documents that rightfully belonged to the family." My phone felt heavy in my pocket. The recording of their intrusion now useless. They'd gotten ahead of me, turned it all around, just like Helen always did. "That's not true," Ryan said suddenly. All eyes turned to him. "Mother, stop. Just stop." Helen's tears vanished instantly. "Ryan, dear, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." He stepped away from her, toward me, but I backed away. "Too little, too late. The embezzlement accusations, they're true, aren't they? That's why you've been so desperate to destroy Audrey's family's reputation, to cover your tracks." Everything I did was for this family. Helen's mask shattered completely. That money secured your future, your sister's future, and she jabbed a finger at me, threatened to ruin everything. The officers exchanged glances. One spoke into his radio. "Mrs. Helen Miller, we're going to need you to come down to the station. This is absurd. I'm the victim here." She turned to her lawyer. "Morton, do something." But Morton was already edging toward the door. "I think our professional relationship has concluded, Helen, given the circumstances." Everything happened quickly after that. Helen screaming as they led her away. Chloe following, wailing about family loyalty. Morton slipping out during the chaos. The evidence I'd gathered being collected, documented, tagged. Ryan stayed. "Audrey," he started. "Don't." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. "Just don't." "I didn't know about the charity money, about any of it, I swear. But you knew about the break-ins, the harassment, the lies." My voice cracked. "You chose them. Every single time, you chose them. I can fix this." "Fix what?" I gestured at our destroyed home. "My grandmother's letters are still gone. Our marriage is over. Your mother's going to jail. What exactly can you fix?" Evan appeared in the doorway. "Audrey, the detective needs your statement." I moved to follow him, but Ryan caught my arm. "I love you," he said desperately. "Isn't that worth something?" I looked at his hand on my arm, remembering every touch, every promise, every moment I'd thought we were building something real. Then I remembered watching him help them break into our home, watching him choose his mother's lies over my truth one last time. "Love without trust isn't love," I said quietly. "It's just another form of control." I pulled away, leaving him standing in the wreckage of our life together. The detective waited with more questions, more forms, more procedures, hours of explaining how I'd gathered evidence of Helen's embezzlement, how I'd documented her harassment, how I'd watched my marriage die slowly, under the weight of manipulation and lies. Later, alone in my car, I pulled out my grandmother's last letter, the real one, not the copy Helen had stolen, the one I'd kept close all these years. "Remember, dear heart," she'd written. "Sometimes winning means walking away. Sometimes the greatest victory is in refusing to play their game at all." My phone buzzed. Ryan again. I declined the call and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the doorway of what used to be our home, looking lost. For a moment, my heart ached. But as I drove away, I realized something. In trying to destroy Helen, I'd almost become her. Manipulative, obsessed with control, willing to sacrifice anything for victory. My grandmother had been right. The real win wasn't in bringing Helen down. It was in finally setting myself free. The courthouse hallway stretched endless and cold. I sat on a hard wooden bench, watching Helen's society friends whisper among themselves as they waited for her arraignment. 3 weeks since the break-in, and still they couldn't quite believe their charitable board president was facing embezzlement charges. Ryan appeared at the end of the hall, dark circles under his eyes. Chloe clung to his arm, shooting daggers at me with her eyes. I focused on my phone, pretending to read emails. "Audrey," his voice was closer than I expected. "Can we talk?" "The divorce papers are with your lawyer," I said without looking up. "Just sign them." "That's not," he sat beside me, too close. "Mother wants to make a deal." Now I looked at him. "A deal?" "She'll return your grandmother's letters, all of them, if you drop the charges." A laugh bubbled up, bitter as coffee grounds. "You really don't get it, do you? She's still my mother. And that's all that matters, right?" I stood, needing distance. Even after everything she did, everything she stole, she made mistakes. Mistakes, my voice carried, making heads turn. She systematically destroyed our marriage, terrorized me in my own home, stole millions from her own charity. Those aren't mistakes, Ryan. They're choices. Helen's lawyer appeared, beckoning to Ryan. But before he could move, the courthouse doors burst open. Evan rushed in, clutching a manila envelope. "Got it," he said, breathing hard. Found it in Morton's office. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single document, a letter from Helen to her lawyer, dated 3 years ago, the day before my wedding. "What is that?" Ryan asked. "Insurance," I said, scanning the contents. "In case I ever threatened her control over you." I looked up as Helen entered in handcuffs, flanked by officers. She planned this from the beginning. The harassment, the break-ins, everything. It was all calculated to make me look unstable, obsessed with the Anderson case. Helen's eyes locked onto the letter. For the first time, I saw real fear there. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. "Your lawyer isn't as loyal as you thought." I held up the letter. "You documented everything, Helen. Every step of your plan to destroy me. And now everyone's going to know exactly who you are. You ungrateful little—" She lunged forward, but the officers held her back. "Mother, stop." Ryan moved between us. "Just stop." Helen's face crumpled. "Everything I did was for you. To protect you from her." "From what?" Ryan's voice cracked. "From being happy? From having a life outside your control. She never loved you like I do." "No," I interrupted. "I loved him enough to let him choose. You loved him enough to make sure he never could." The whispers around us grew louder. Helen's friends watched in horror as their perfect society matron shattered before their eyes. Chloe backed away from her mother, finally seeing the truth she'd helped enable. "The arraignment's starting," Evan said softly. I handed the letter to the district attorney, who'd been waiting quietly nearby. Then I turned to Ryan one last time. "I did love you," I said. "But love shouldn't hurt like this. Audrey, please." "Goodbye, Ryan." I walked away as Helen was led into the courtroom, her carefully constructed world collapsing behind me. My phone buzzed. A text from my grandmother's old law partner. "Found something in the archives," it read. "Your grandmother would be proud." Outside, the autumn air felt clean and sharp. Evan caught up with me at the bottom of the courthouse steps. "You okay?" he asked. I watched leaves scatter across the pavement, breaking free from their branches, carried away by the wind. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be. Because sometimes winning isn't about destroying your enemies. Sometimes it's about refusing to let them destroy you. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply walking away, head held high, leaving them to face the consequences of their own choices." The last box from my old life sat unopened on my new apartment floor. Through the window, downtown lights glittered like scattered stars, so different from the suburban darkness I'd left behind. My phone lit up. Evan's text about Helen's sentencing. 5 years for embezzlement. The society pages were already buzzing with scandal. Her carefully crafted reputation shattered like a dropped teacup. A knock at the door made me freeze. I knew that pattern. 3 quick taps, 1 slow. Ryan stood in the hallway, holding a familiar leather-bound bundle. "Grandmother's letters," I said, throat tight. "Found them in Mother's study while cleaning out the house." He held them out like a peace offering. "They were always yours." I took the bundle, fingers tracing the worn edges. "How is she?" "Angry. Bitter." He shrugged. "Chloe's in therapy. Says she's starting to understand some things about our family." "And you?" "Learning to stand on my own." He glanced past me into the apartment. "You're painting." An easel stood by the window, canvas half covered in bold strokes of red and gold, something I discovered by accident, a way to pour out everything words couldn't express. "It helps," I said simply. "Audrey, I don't." I stepped back, creating distance. "We both know why it ended." "I know, He pulled out an envelope. "The signed divorce papers. And something else you should see." Inside was a newspaper clipping from 30 years ago. A small article about a young Helen Miller, before she married into money, desperately trying to prove herself worthy of high society. "She was always afraid," Ryan said quietly, "of losing control, of being exposed as not good enough. I'm not excusing what she did, but I understand it now. Understanding doesn't make it right. No, but it helps me not become her." A siren wailed somewhere in the city below. In my old life, I would have flinched at the noise. Now it felt like a reminder. Life goes on, changes, transforms. I never wanted revenge, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. I just wanted to be free. I know, that's why you won. He turned to leave, then paused. The painting, it's beautiful. After he left, I opened the bundle of letters. My grandmother's words flowed across the pages, telling stories of strength, of standing up to bullies, of choosing integrity over revenge. But one passage caught my eye, written just before she died. Remember, dear heart, some people will try to dim your light because they fear their own darkness. Your power lies not in fighting them, but in continuing to shine. I picked up my brush, adding touches of blue to the canvas. Not everything needed resolution. Not every story needed a neat ending. Sometimes victory wasn't in destroying your enemies or even forgiving them. Sometimes it was in discovering who you really were without them. My phone buzzed again. Evan inviting me to dinner. Not a date, not yet, but maybe someday. For now, friendship was enough. For now, I had my freedom, my truth, my art. The city lights flickered, casting shadows that danced across my canvas. In my old life, I would have seen threats in those shadows. Now I saw possibilities, patterns, stories waiting to be told. I picked up another brush. The night was young. The canvas was waiting. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free. Not because I'd won, not because Helen lost, but because I'd finally learned the difference between revenge and liberation. And in that difference, I found myself.
You got your best friend pregnant. I wonder what he's talking about. A sense of detachment, as though it's someone else's problem, wells up inside me. But the reality hits me with the words Ella utters right in front of me. Well, that's the situation. So you're going to divorce Harry, right? Yvonne can't believe it. Pregnant with Ella. When I ask back, Ella smirks and continues with a mocking look. You figured it out, right? I'm taking your husband. So get out, gladly I reply, with a smile. Ella is really clueless. Does she think I knew nothing? Of course, that's not the case. I've known about their affair for quite a while. I just didn't confront them until I was ready. But now this saves me the trouble. They've basically confessed to cheating on me, so I'll return the affair with interest. Brace yourselves, smiling, I head to the front door. My name is Yvonne Kirby. I'm a 34-year-old housewife working part-time. I head to the front door. At a supermarket, my husband Harry works at a car dealership for a well-known manufacturer. I think his salary is decent, but that doesn't mean we're rolling in dough. He needs to look sharp for work, and our daughter Elsie wants to attend a private middle school. She's just started 4th grade but will need more money for her exams. That's why I work part-time, to help out with finances. Ideally, I'd work full-time, but it's not that simple. The first issue is taking care of my mother-in-law. She lives alone, has mobility issues, and is elderly. She gets a pension, but my care and support are essential. The only silver lining is the house my late father-in-law built nearby. She lives there alone, having refused to move in with us to stay in her house full of memories. The second issue is Harry's job. He's always busy, leaving all the household chores to me. If I worked full-time, the housework would just pile up. Staying the course is the most realistic option, isn't it? I just can't take that final step. That's my current situation. But I knew from before we got married that I would be doing the household chores alone and that my mother-in-law would need care. So I'm not unhappy with how things are. But there's one thing I regret, becoming friends with Ella, who introduced me to Harry. Ella and I met in college. Back then, I was pretty plain. Ella, on the other hand, was popular and quite noticeable. Sure, Ella looked good and had a likable personality, but that was just a facade. The real Ella was the worst, however. I often hung out with Ella. I didn't realize this until much later. Unaware, I often hung out with Ella. Ivone, you got something on your mind. Ella would pat my shoulder lightly. I answered a bit shyly, I'm stuck on a report due next week. Is that all? I'm here for you. Let's work on it together. But hanging out with someone plain like me, won't people start looking at you funny? Ella. I glanced around and felt the weight of people's stares, their curiosity evident as to why Ella was in the company of someone as unremarkable as me. I turned away. What are you talking about? You and I have been best friends since we enrolled. Ella's words caused a stir around us. She cast a stern look at the onlookers. What, is it weird that Aone and I are best friends? I noticed a student shaking their head with a wry smile. Witnessing this, Ella drew me close and declared, we're total opposites, but we're best friends. Everyone, be nice to Aone, all right? Got it, I heard someone say slowly. I began to be accepted, all thanks to Ella's scheme. Ella frequently employed the phrase, I'll do it for you, whether it was, I'll hang out with you, or I'll wait for you. It subtly implied that my abilities were only viable because of her, insinuating my own naivety. Consequently, I started to believe that I could only accomplish things with Ella's assistance, attributing all success to her. In retrospect, it was a fallacy. I had been led to believe I wasn't competent enough. Unaware of this manipulation, I spent my college years overly reliant on Ella. Thus, when Ella requested a favor, I readily acquiesced. You're taking the car dealership's recruitment interview. I had my eye on that place too. Can you give it up for me? Ella implored. But I began to protest. Come on, Aone. We're friends, aren't we? Constantly comparing myself to Ella, I always felt inferior. Despite having similar grades, she excelled in personality and appearance. I felt I stood no chance if we both pursued the same opportunities. These insecurities made me yield easily. Then maybe I'll go for banking, I conceded. That's a good idea. You're more suited to be a hard-working bank employee, Aone, Ella affirmed. Ultimately, Ella secured the job at the car dealership, and I settled for a position in a bank. At the time, I didn't perceive it as part of Ella's plan, rather, I deemed myself fortunate to have obtained a stable job by sacrificing the dealership position for her. Shortly after, Ella approached me with a proposition. I've got someone I want to introduce you to, Aone. Harry is my co-worker. I think he's perfect for you. Why not give it a try? I'm sure about it. Let's meet him. Trusting Ella's judgment implicitly, I agreed. Following her introduction, I met Harry. We began dating, and during one of our outings, Harry confided, Ivone, you're such a good person. I'd like to marry someone like you. Me? I asked, taken aback. But I can't ask you to marry me, Harry sighed. Curious, I inquired about his reservations, prompting Harry to disclose his familial obligations. His mother's mobility issues meant that his future spouse would need to assume caregiving responsibilities. This uncertainty clouded his decision to marry. It's okay. I don't mind at all. I'm occupied with work, and you'd handle the household chores. Are you sure? I reassured him. Yes, I'm sure. Leave it to me. Genuinely in love with Harry, I saw no issue with his circumstances. Thus, I agreed to marry him. However, my trust was soon shattered. Years into our marriage, while picking up Elsie from kindergarten, Daisy, usually a jovial fellow mom, approached me with a solemn expression. Hey, can we talk for a bit? Do you have time now? She asked. Sure, I'm off from work today, so I have a bit of time. Between housework and caring for my mother-in-law, engaging with other moms is important as Elsie's mother, so I followed Daisy to a nearby cafe, as she suggested. Once we ordered, Daisy began to talk. You see, I saw something. Our kids started eating their cakes, and Daisy shared her story. She had been going to a gym near the station for her diet. A few days ago, she saw Harry there. Daisy had met Harry at the kindergarten before, so she recognized him right away. But that's where the problem started. Harry was with an unknown woman, looking quite intimate. Daisy asked me with a stern face, "Isn't that cheating?" Cheating? No way, that can't be, I replied, trying to hide my agitation. Daisy put her hand on mine as I gripped my cup tightly. Why don't we check it out secretly? If it's cheating, we might get some evidence. The idea of checking scared me, but I couldn't just ignore the possibility of infidelity. After some thought, I agreed to accompany Daisy to the gym. On the day, I left Elsie with my mother-in-law and met Daisy in the neighborhood. We headed to the gym together. We entered the gym as trial members. Soon, Harry arrived at the gym, but he was alone. No woman, no colleagues, no friends. Daisy's just jumping to conclusions, I thought, relieved. Then a familiar voice caught my attention. Sorry, I got a bit delayed. That voice, it's Ella. My heart skipped a beat. What were you up to? Had a troublesome customer kept making a fuss. Their cheerful conversation continued. Watching them, my heart ached. Feeling betrayed was the strongest emotion, followed by the shock that Ella, who was supposed to be my best friend, was involved. I took some photos. Is it okay? Daisy's voice brought me back. I nodded, but honestly, I was far from okay. My mind went blank. I don't remember much after that. According to Daisy, who filled me in later, the two left the gym and went to Ella's place. Apparently, I followed them with Daisy and even took photos of them entering the room. I don't remember it, but the evidence was clearly on my phone. With the evidence, it'd be better to divorce, Daisy advised me. But rushing into a divorce wasn't wise. Elsie is young, and I couldn't live on my part-time job alone. Just a little patience, just a bit more, and then I'll divorce him. From that day, I had a new goal in my life, to stabilize my living situation and secure a steady income to save up little by little, so I'd be ready for a divorce whenever it came. I focused on these two things, yet my heart wasn't calm. Every time Harry came home with a nonchalant face, I felt boiling anger inside. But somewhere in my heart, I still wanted to believe in Harry. So occasionally, I asked him things like this, Harry, why don't you take Elsie out sometime? I can't do that, you know. Being at the car dealership, my busiest times are when everyone else is off. He seemed like he didn't want to deal with our daughter. Child rearing was my job, like he was saying that. I just nodded, okay, I see. How about visiting your mom on your days off? I don't really have anything to talk about with my mom. But you can't even take care of her, usually, taking care of her is your job. Not mine. She's not a kid, so I'll stay out of it. Harry's tone grew stern, seemingly irritated. I closed my mouth, feeling dejected. It seemed like Harry had lost his affection, not just for me but for Elsie and my mother-in-law as well. I felt disappointed, yet somewhere relieved, believe no more attachments. Those words floated in my mind. The following years were truly hellish. Living with Harry was just cohabitation. We barely spoke, and our interactions were minimal. Plus, as Elsie grew older, she started to despise Harry. I don't even need a dad like him, she would say things like that. One day, Harry had to go to the manufacturer's headquarters for work. Perfect timing, I thought, and headed to my mother-in-law's house with Elsie. During Harry's business trip, Elsie and I stayed at her grandmother's house. But the next day, I got a strange call from Harry, who was supposed to be away. "You're not home." "Where are you?" he asked abruptly. "I'm at your mom's." "What about your business trip?" I inquired. "Just get back home right now," he said bluntly, then hung up. Puzzled, I headed home. Entering the house, I heard the TV in the living room. "Harry, did something happen on your trip?" I asked as I opened the living room door. At that moment, I saw Harry talking with Ella. But as soon as he noticed me, Harry pulled away from her, then he got down on his knees. "I got your best friend pregnant," he blurted out. "What is he talking about?" I thought, feeling detached, like it was someone else's issue. But reality struck with the words Ella blurted out right in front of me. "Well, that's how it is." "So, you're going to divorce Harry, right, Yvonne? You're pregnant." Ella, my best friend, smirked and continued with a mocking look, "You figured it out, right? I'm taking your husband, so get out." "Gladly," I replied with a smile and turned on my heel. Ella really is clueless, does she think I knew nothing about it? Of course, that's not true. I've known about you two for quite some time. I just didn't confront you until I was ready. But now you've made it easier for me by confessing to your affair. Well then, prepare yourselves because I'm going to return everything you've done to me with interest, I said to myself, smiling as I headed for the front door. Harry yelled as if trying to stop me, "You realize talking about divorce, right? Are you sure you understand that?" "I understand perfectly. You think you can make it on just your part-time income after we divorce?" Harry sneered. I sighed, then Harry, in his arrogant manner, offered, "If you're really desperate, I might hire you to take care of my mom." "That suits you perfectly, taking care of the elderly." Harry and Ella burst into laughter. Seeing them, I sighed again. "Ella, you finally showed your true colors, huh?" "What are you talking about?" Ella feigned ignorance. I snorted and continued, pretending to be my friend, introducing me to Harry. "It was all just to use me conveniently, wasn't it?" "Oh, you knew," boring Ella pouted. "Yes, I realized your true nature when I found out about your affair with Harry." I showed them the evidence, photos of their affair. "What the heck is that?" Ella rushed over and stared at the phone screen. When she realized the photos were of them, she glared at me sharply. "How long have you known?" "What, about 5 years?" "Don't joke with me." Ella raised her voice. I answered calmly, I was preparing for life after the divorce. I thought I'd be told I couldn't make it on my part-time income. I smiled at Harry, as if saying, just as I expected. Harry seemed infuriated by my attitude and suddenly started making a scene. "Well then, get out as soon as you can. I'll send your stuff wherever you want." "No need for that, most of my things are already at your mom's place." "What? At my mom's?" Harry's face changed color. I continued, trying to suppress a laugh. "Didn't you notice that your wife's and family's belongings have been gradually disappearing?" "That's, pathetic, in more ways than one," I snorted. Harry, clearly agitated, raised his voice. "Enough, then. There's no more to talk about. I'll be claiming alimony later. I'll give you the divorce papers. Then do whatever you want. Just be prepared, the cost of cheating isn't cheap." I looked back and forth between Harry and Ella, then left the house, heading straight to my in-laws' place. Elsie was preparing dinner when I arrived. "Welcome back." "What was it, Mom?" Actually, I hesitated. "Elsie, is it about the divorce? If so, I'm all for it." "Aren't you, Elsie?" Shocked, Elsie said, "I don't need a dad like him." That's Elsie's catchphrase, so she was actually supporting the divorce. I finally realized how she felt. Elsie, I'm sorry I've caused you trouble. I'm fine, fine. But Grandma, Elsie glanced at my mother-in-law, realizing. I turned to her. Mom, it's okay. It's Harry's fault, isn't it? Well, yes, but... I averted my gaze. Then, my mother-in-law patted my head. So, you moved things along because you saw this coming. Yes, but what about you, Mom? It's fine. I've made up my mind too, my mother-in-law smiled warmly. I felt a sense of relief, and at the same time, tears started to flow. I had actually been encouraging her to consider moving into a care facility. It wasn't that I didn't want to take care of her, it was to ensure she wouldn't be in trouble when I got divorced. So, I was glad she was positive about moving into the facility. We had already been making progress with the arrangements, all that was left was to get her consent. Then I'll proceed with the care facility arrangements, please do, my mother-in-law nodded firmly. The next day, I began handling various procedures, looking for a new place, finding a lawyer. There was so much to do, especially finding a house for Elsie and me. Comfort was key. I visited several real estate agents. 3 days later, as I left a real estate office, my phone started ringing. Hello. The moment I answered, a loud voice blasted through. How many times do you think I've called you, Ella? I instinctively pulled the phone away and murmured, Yes, it's me, Ella. Where are you? At a real estate office. Why? As I asked, Ella's voice got even louder. Real estate. Looking for a house with stolen money, are you? Stolen? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. The passbook Harry gave me was empty. I tried to calm my breathing. I revealed the truth, the account was empty from the start. We were always struggling financially. Don't lie, Harry's company pays well. There's no way you had financial troubles, Ella's loud voice hurt my ear. I brought the phone back to my face and continued, well, no matter how good the salary, supporting a lover as well would naturally drain it. What do you mean? You still don't get it. That's why I patiently explained it to her. Actually, Harry had been splitting his salary into 2 parts, one for supporting our family and the other for spending on Ella. It looked like about 70% was for us, and the rest was used for Ella. I found out about this after I discovered their affair. Wanting more evidence, I hired a professional to investigate. That's when the salary issue came to light. When I told Ella this, she raised her voice in disbelief. What? You lived on 70% of his salary. That's impossible, stop lying. That's why I was working part-time. But that's... Ella stuttered. I pressed on, so, there's no money left. But you must have some, give it to me. Then, her audacity was astonishing, but I couldn't just let it slide. I only have what I earned myself. If you have a problem, I'll add it to the alimony. Add to it? Yes, the alimony I'll demand from you as the mistress. I was thinking of the usual amount, but since you're complaining. I was cut off as the phone call abruptly ended. After that, Ella didn't answer any of my calls. She must be reflecting, I thought, but it seemed not. The next day, Ella called again. As soon as I answered, she started yelling, Where did you hide her? You don't answer my calls, and now what are you talking about? That woman, where did you put her? Who was she talking about? Surely not Elsie. What did she mean? As I pondered, Ella couldn't hold back and shouted, Harry's mother. She's got money, right? She's not at home, where did you hide her? Oh, you mean Mom, where is she? Tell me. Ella seemed quite desperate, realizing she was planning to ask my mother-in-law for money. I firmly refused, sorry, but I won't tell you. Why not? She's got money, right? If not, sell the in-laws' house. Ella's greed was on full display. She talked about taking my mother-in-law's money or failing that, selling her house to get the cash. She repeated this several times. Sighing, I asked Ella, "You sure you want to discuss this with me?" "Doesn't matter. Once the divorce papers are in, you're just a stranger." That might be true, but what if I told my mother-in-law about her plans? Ella seemed unable to even consider that possibility. Had they been squandering that much money? I was baffled, but then I reconsidered. It's too much trouble. So, I'll tell you about my mother-in-law. You should have confessed from the start. Where is she? In a senior care facility. The address is... I gave Ella the address I had noted down. Ella began to laugh. I'll go there right away and start the process to sell the house. That's impossible. Why are you upset? No, it's just that the house doesn't exist anymore. As I said this, Ella's laughter abruptly stopped. After a pause, she cautiously asked me, "What do you mean my mother-in-law sold the house?" The money was used for her care facility. Sold it, I recalled. When I first suggested the care facility to my mother-in-law, she initially refused, citing the lack of funds for admission. That's when I proposed selling the house. She hesitated but eventually decided to sell. We didn't want Harry to catch on to our plans until I brought up divorce, so she continued living in the house, paying rent, until our divorce discussion started. And now here we are. So, she doesn't have any money left. That's right. This is your fault. Don't forget this. With a scream that sounded like the death throes, Ella hung up the phone. Anyway, she must have given up by now. Let those two do whatever they want. While thinking this, I methodically proceeded with the divorce procedures. First, I hired a lawyer to claim alimony. I was sure they would resist, but surprisingly, they accepted the amount suggested by the lawyer. Later, I received the alimony through the lawyer. At the same time, I signed the divorce papers and had them delivered to Harry. Harry apparently signed them readily, and I successfully completed the divorce. It took 3 months to finalize everything. It was tough, but I'm glad I persevered. Relieved, I went to thank my lawyer. That's when I was handed something unexpected, a wedding celebration party. It was an invitation to a wedding party. Ella, not knowing my home address, had left it with the lawyer. Was she inviting me to gloat as the woman whose husband was taken away? I was about to tear it up right there, but then I had a second thought. Harry's associates would surely be at the party. Maybe I could do something. I contacted a certain person. Sure enough, they had also received an invitation. So, I decided to attend the wedding party. The venue was a hotel's banquet hall. It was called a party, but it was essentially a wedding reception. They really went all out despite having no money. As I was thinking this, a voice came from behind, "Thank you for coming." I turned around to see Ella in a dress, with Harry beside her. "If you're going to do this, you might as well have had a wedding." "Sorry, I can't wear a wedding dress because I'm pregnant." Ella was clearly heavily pregnant. She was willing to go this far just to humiliate me. I responded, looking away, "Oh, right. But I'm glad you came." "I thought you wouldn't." Ella made a show of pretending to cry. "Don't cry now," I said, knowing full well. I looked around, noticing people quickly avert their eyes. Ella must have said something convenient for her. The atmosphere felt oddly cold. If that's how they want to play it, I'm ready to go all out. A fire ignited in my heart. Pretending to console Ella, I scanned the room for someone. Soon, I found the person I was looking for. "Oh, sorry. I see someone I know," I said quickly, excusing myself. For some reason, Ella followed me. But I expected this. She would want to make a spectacle of me, I thought. So, with that in mind, I decided to leave the place. I approached the person from behind. Sorry to keep you waiting. The person turned around at my voice. It was Daisy. Oh, you're already here. Yes, just greeted my ex-husband and his new friend, as I gestured towards them. Harry suddenly became flustered. He awkwardly bowed to Daisy. Thank you for coming today. But why is Ione's friend here? I'm accompanying my husband, you know. I don't think you've met him yet. Daisy smiled and pulled the arm of a man standing beside her. Harry's face went pale. Daisy introduced her husband to Harry. This is my husband, Ted. He owns a local supermarket and is a customer of your company, Mr. Scott's. Harry looked away, embarrassed. Daisy's husband was a VIP customer of Harry's company. He bought not only his own car but also Daisy's car from Harry's dealership. He even referred his supermarket employees to Harry's company. In other words, he was a very important customer to Harry. It's no wonder Harry was panicking amidst this. Daisy introduced me to her husband. This is my friend, Ivone. We're partners in an investment company. As Daisy said this, Ella's face changed color. Investment company. What's that? Exactly what it sounds like. Harry's salary wasn't enough, so I've always been investing, and it grew into this. This happened right after I discovered Harry and Ella's affair. I realized I needed a stable income for the divorce. That's when I turned to investing, something I started after getting married. Being a former banker, I had some knowledge about investments. Increasing my investment amount turned out to be a huge hit. Before I knew it, I had a stable income. I told Daisy about it, and she became interested. We started investing together, and soon other mom friends caught wind of it. Then we thought, why not start a company? So we did, and that's how we started our business. So, after the divorce, I started working at the investment company. I have a good income now, and I'm glad I got divorced. What do you mean? How about you? Did you manage to get the money? Ella looked away, obviously upset. I continued with a smile. Well, you must be in a tougher financial situation now, huh? Because Harry is in such a state, right? I pointed to where Harry was kneeling. Apparently, he had been scolded by Daisy's husband. I'm sorry my affair caused all this. I'll be honest from now on. Please continue doing business with us. Harry was desperately apologizing, but Daisy's husband ignored him. In the end, Harry was left in the lurch. After losing an important client, he became an outcast at work, talked about behind his back by bosses and colleagues. Unable to bear such a life, Harry resigned. Meanwhile, pregnant Ella pressed Harry for a divorce, but being pregnant, she couldn't work. Reluctantly, she decided to divorce. After giving birth, they are currently in the midst of a messy divorce trial. To cover the costs of the trial, Harry works at a construction site, while Ella works at a nightclub. They both toil tirelessly, each trying to discredit the other in court. I heard all this from my mother-in-law, whom I still visit after the divorce. Elsie is her granddaughter, after all. Elsie is preparing for her middle school entrance exams next year. Mom, is it okay if I go to a private school? Do we have enough money? Of course, dear. Mom will work hard, so you should too. Okay, I want to be like you, Mom, so I'll do my best. Elsie gives me the strength to keep going. I met my true friend, Daisy. My happiness is all thanks to Elsie. I'd do anything for her, that's how strongly I feel.